On July 1st, 1935, Heinrich Himmler, the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, signed the founding documents of a state-funded research organization. Its official name was the Ahnenerbe. Its stated mission was to study the heritage of the Aryan race. Its actual function was something far stranger, something that has been quietly removed from most history books. They sent scientists to Tibet. They dispatched archaeologists to Iceland. They funded expeditions across 3 continents, all in search of a single, burning idea that a lost master race had once ruled the earth and that its descendants now wore SS uniforms. Most people, when they think about the Third Reich, think about political extremism, industrial warfare, bureaucratic evil, and all of that is true, but beneath it, far beneath it, there was something else. A system of belief so old, so deliberately constructed, and so carefully buried after 1945 that its full weight has never been placed before the public. You are about to hear that weight. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear may change how you see history itself. The occult empire behind Nazi Germany did not die in 1945. It simply changed its clothes. To understand where this story ends, you have to go back to where it begins. Not Berlin, not Munich, Vienna. The year is 1909. Imagine standing in a Vienna homeless shelter in the winter of that year. The city is one of the great cultural capitals of Europe, imperial, ornate, suffocating with old-world grandeur. But this shelter is not that Vienna. This is the underside, cold corridors, thin soup, men with failed ambitions and nowhere left to go. One of those men is 20 years old. His name is Adolf Hitler. He is not yet a politician, not yet anything. He is a rejected art student reading a small publication called Ostara. That detail, documented by historians, including Brigitte Hamann in her biography, Hitler's Vienna, it's not a footnote. It is the entry point to everything. Ostara was published by a defrocked Cistercian monk named Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels. He had abandoned the monastery in 1899, not to find peace, but to construct an ideology. He fused the mystical symbolism of medieval Christianity with a brutal racial hierarchy he called Ariosophy, the wisdom of the Aryans. His magazine, which he began publishing in 1905, depicted blonde-haired beings locked in a cosmic struggle against dark, subhuman races. It borrowed freely from occult tradition, runic symbolism, and a kind of sacred rage that felt, to anyone who had been left behind by the modern world, like revelation. Hitler himself later told associates he had read Ostara in Vienna. He went so far as to visit Lanz von Liebenfels personally to request back issues. That meeting is documented, but Lanz was not operating alone. He had a predecessor, and that predecessor was the most dangerous man you have never heard of. His name was Guido von List. He was an Austrian mystic who, during a period of blindness following a cataract operation in 1902, claimed to have received a vision of the ancient Aryan runic alphabet, an 18-character system he called the Armanen runes. He published his findings as though they were recovered history. They were not. They were his invention. But they were presented as secret knowledge suppressed by the church, hidden from the Aryan people for centuries. He predicted, in writing, the rise of a great Germanic leader. He named the year. He said 1932. Hitler came to power in January 1933. 1 year off. Something is already wrong before you understand why, but this is where things take a darker turn. But what happens next changes everything. On August 18, 1918, in a room above a Munich restaurant called the Four Seasons, a man named Rudolf von Sebottendorf formally dedicated a new secret society. He called it the Thule Gesellschaft, the Thule Society, named for a mythical lost landmass in the frozen north, believed by its founders to be the original homeland of the Aryan race. Sebottendorf was not a simple eccentric. He was a trained occultist, a former member of the German Norden, Germany's first organized racist secret society, and a man with very specific political ambitions. The Thule Society was, on the surface, a reading club for nationalists. Beneath the surface, it was a laboratory for an idea that a new Germany could be conjured from ancient myth. The membership list, as described by Hitler biographer Ian Kershaw, reads like, and I am quoting him directly, "a who's who of early Nazi sympathizers and leading figures in Munich. Rudolf Hess was connected to it. Alfred Rosenberg, who would later become Nazi Germany's chief ideological officer, was connected to it. Dietrich Eckart, journalist, poet, occultist, and the man who would become Hitler's most important early mentor, was a core member. In January 1919, the Thule Society sponsored the founding of a small political party, the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, and the German Workers' Party, the DAP, the very same organization that Adolf Hitler joined as member number 555 later that year. The very same organization he would reshape into the NSDAP, the Nazi Party. The political movement that would murder millions was incubated inside an occult secret society. This is not speculation. This is the documented record. Now a document vanished. And when something vanishes in the middle of power, the reason is never innocent. In 1933, shortly after Hitler came to power, Rudolf von Sebottendorf published a book. Its title translates as Before Hitler Came. In it, he claimed explicitly and in print that the Thule Society had laid the groundwork for National Socialism. He wanted credit, but he wanted history to know. The Nazi regime confiscated the book within weeks of publication. Sebottendorf was arrested. He was released, but the book was gone, pulled from circulation, removed from libraries, erased from the record. Why would anyone need to erase this? The people who died because Himmler needed a castle to match his mythology. They did not disappear quietly. Wewelsburg is a Renaissance castle in Westphalia. In 1934, Himmler leased it for 100 years, a number that was not accidental, and declared it the spiritual center of the SS order. To renovate it, he established a concentration camp on its grounds. The camp was called Niederhagen. Of the 3,900 prisoners held there, documented records confirm that at least 1,285 died, worked to death building a palace of occult ambition. Or you would have looked at that castle and seen stone. Himmler saw a temple. Anyone with his beliefs would have made the same calculation. That is the most disturbing part of this. This is where documented history and myth begin to blur. What is documented fact? The Thule Society sponsored the DAP, the precursor to the Nazi Party. Its members became senior figures in the Nazi state. The Ahnenerbe was officially founded by Himmler in 1935 and funded by the SS. The Tibet expedition of 1938 to 1939 occurred and was led by SS zoologist Ernst Schaefer. Wewelsburg's concentration camp existed, and its death toll is recorded. What remains unknown, the full extent of the ideological influence these occult networks had on specific Nazi policy decisions. When what some historians believe, and this must be labelled as scholarly debate, historian Nicholas Goodrick Clark, in his rigorous academic study The Occult Roots of Nazism, argues that Ariosophy was not a direct cause of Nazism, but rather provided a pre-existing vocabulary of racial mythology that Nazi ideology absorbed and weaponized. Other historians place the connection more directly. What they uncovered next was never meant to be public. In December 1938, 5 SS officers, 2 cameras, and a set of measuring instruments designed to take skull dimensions crossed the border into Tibet. Himmler sent scientists to the roof of the world to measure Tibetan skulls, looking for traces of Aryan blood. And this is where history stops making sense. The Tibet expedition was led by zoologist Ernst Schaefer, a member of the SS-5 Germans. They arrived in Lhasa in January 1939. They took measurements, they photographed, they recorded. They were looking, according to the expedition's own documentation, for evidence that a Nordic master race had migrated to the Himalayas in some ancient age, that the descendants of Aryan gods lived among the mountain monasteries. They found no such evidence. They returned. The war came. But the architect of the expedition, the man behind the entire occult apparatus of the SS, was not Himmler alone. Behind Himmler stood a figure even less known than Zobottendorf. His name was Karl Maria Willigut, an Austrian occultist who had at one point been institutionalized for psychiatric illness, a man who claimed to carry within his memory the inherited ancestral knowledge of an ancient Germanic clan stretching back 9,000 years. Himmler called him his Rasputin. He was given an SS rank. He was given an office. And when Himmler needed to choose the location for the SS's spiritual headquarters, he turned to Willigut's visions and prophecies. Those visions led to Wewelsburg. A former psychiatric patient chose the sacred center of the Nazi Empire. And then I found something I wish I could unsee. In 1945, as Allied forces closed in, Ahnenerbe members did not surrender their records. They burned them. Crate after crate of expedition findings, of racial pseudoscience, of documented occult research, reduced to ash. What survived did so only by accident. And then something quieter happened, something that took decades to understand. Many of the Ahnenerbe's former members, archaeologists, anthropologists, researchers, were not prosecuted after the war. Not they underwent denazification proceedings, emerged with their credentials largely intact, and were quietly absorbed back into West Germany's academic and archaeological establishment. According to documented scholarship, this infiltration actively suppressed serious historical investigation into the Ahnenerbe's activities. The full scholarly reckoning with what the Ahnenerbe had done could not begin until German reunification in 1990. 45 years of buried history. Who benefits from a secret staying hidden? Ask who controls the institutions guarding the archives. What does it mean when the keepers of knowledge become the destroyers of it? That question is not rhetorical. It is the hinge on which this entire story turns. The Ahnenerbe was not a rogue experiment. It was state-funded. It was SS-administered. It was the official scientific arm of a government that had decided mythology was more useful than evidence. And when the government fell, the people who had served that mythology did not vanish. They reorganized. They published. They shaped what the next generation would be allowed to know. The historical secret of the Nazi occult empire does not live only in the past. It lives in every gap between what is taught and what actually occurred. But the most disturbing part hasn't been told yet. I need you to sit with this for a moment. In 1905, a defrocked monk published a magazine. In 1909, a homeless young man read it in a shelter. In 1933, the man who founded the society that built the party that man led tried to claim credit and was immediately silenced. The ideology that burned the world was assembled by mystics, published in small magazines, passed hand to hand through secret reading rooms in Vienna and Munich, decades before anyone outside Germany had heard the name Hitler. We began in a Vienna homeless shelter, a cold room, a young man reading a magazine about destiny. That image looks different now. It is not the beginning of a political career. It is the end of a long road, a road built by occultists, runic visionaries, secret society founders, and pseudo-archaeologists who had spent 30 years constructing a mythology powerful enough to hollow out a civilization. The question this entire story circles around is not, did the occult cause Nazism? Historians, rightly, are careful about that. The documented record shows ideology flowing through, being absorbed, being weaponized. Not a single occult switch that was flipped. When the question that cannot be answered, the one that remains open, is this: how much of what drove the specific shape of Nazi belief, its rituals, its symbology, its almost religious certainty about racial hierarchy, came from these pre-existing occult networks? We do not know the full answer. The records were burned. And there is one final thing, small, almost quiet, easily missed. Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels, the defrocked monk who published Ostara, whose magazine a young Hitler carried through the streets of Vienna, survived World War II. He died in 1954 in Vienna, in obscurity. He lived long enough to see what had been done with the ideas he had seeded into the world. He was reportedly forbidden by the post-war Austrian authorities from ever publishing again. He never publicly accounted for what he had set in motion. Think about what it means to build something, to release it into the world, and to outlive it by 9 years, surrounded by the ruins it made. History does not always punish its architects. Sometimes it simply forgets them. But what happened next was far more disturbing than anyone expected.